Okay, we are recording. Samir, how you doing today?
I'm doing very well. I'm doing very. How about you?
Yeah, no one ever asked me how I'm doing. Yeah, I'm all right, thanks.
It's a very, very American of me, I think.
Yeah, I'm all right, thank you. Yeah, not too bad. Where are you today?
I'm in Los Angeles. It's 9 a.m. right now here, so it's about 6 p.m. over there, something like
Yeah,
that. Yeah, quick maths. But yeah, it's good. And life is good. How about you?
good stuff. Yeah, I'm all right. The day starts. This is like my last bit of work today, so the day's starting to wind down, which is nice. I can finish it on a chat about records, which is one of my favourite things to do. So,
Perfect.
okay, right, Samir, I'm going to kick off your playlist, and I would like you to tell me, please, the song that you regard as having the greatest ever intro, please.
I'd say I have to say "Beat It" by Michael Jackson. And so much of it is subjective and based on your memories of first listening to songs. But when that synth bass kicks in, the kick and the snare, it transports me back to my childhood, and it's one of this uh, a cop out, but it's true for me.
Oh, it's not a cop out. Do you know what? I've done 400. I see today I've done 444 episodes, and no one's ever said that, and I don't know why. Because it is a monster, isn't it?
It is, it truly is. It was between that or Baba O'Reilly, to be honest, but I'm sure everyone said that.
Do you know what? I literally I saw Pearl Jam the weekend before last in London, and they brought out Johnny Marr for the last
Oh
song, and
wow,
they played Bubba O'Reilly, and it was huge. It was so
yeah.
good, and no one's chose that either.
Wow,
It's
wow.
crazy. So, I mean, the thing I think we've beat it. It's it still takes a while for the payoff because you get that bong bong and then you get that snare and it's like, oh, it's
Exactly.
so good. And that's
So
before
good.
you got the riff, and then the riff comes and it's like, oh,
Exactly.
strap in, like this
Yeah.
is you're on a ride now. Yeah,
It's just
what?
the patience, they allow the listener to go into a just journey, and it's as a creator, as a songwriter, it can feel scary to leave that space open for so long, but that's exciting.
Well, that's kind of a question that I like to ask songwriters. Um, and looking at the trends in how people consume their music now via you know younger people using things like TikTok and everybody's clamoring to get on sort of Spotify playlists, and it feels that like unless you grab them in them first 3 seconds, you're getting lost. You're not taking beat into a record company building if you're a pop artist anymore because
No.
you're gonna get laughed out the door, which
Yeah.
it feels crazy to say these things, but I just want to know how any of them kind of things filter through to your creative process when you're writing.
You know, for me, for the most part, the intros is something that I agonize over, but it's usually at the very end. It's a bit at the very end because, I want to get the meat and potatoes in. I want to figure out what the melody is, what the song is about, what instrumentation is going to take us there. But, I try not to just have my process be affected by the way that people consume things. But because I know also that, it could be the 3 seconds of the intro, it could be 3 seconds in the bridge, it could be 3 seconds in the post. It's just one of those things. But it's something that does come in for me, and it's an extremely important thing. Maybe I should be doing it earlier, I think, because you get a little tired after after a certain point. I should probably start doing it earlier.
Yeah, it's weird. I think like sometimes when I speak to sort of more mainstream pop writers, like they basically approach it as like a science, which feels crazy. It's like, well, and I'm not saying there's a right or wrong.
No.
Different things for different people, but the fact that so many because people generally come at this question with two ends. It's either like, oh, Help by the Beatles, bang, help, you're in, and
Hmm.
like,
Yeah,
or you go for a Barbara O'Reilly or a Bohemian Rhapsody or something
that's
that's
very interesting.
and it is. I always find it quite intriguing as to like if people just go right, I want it straight away, or
Yeah,
I want the journey and then I want the payoff.
yeah,
Uh,
exactly. I'm more of the journey person, that's for sure.
you
The
and me
payoff.
both, brother. You and me both.
Yeah.
I'm going to take you back for track two, Samir, and I'm going to ask you, please, to tell me the first song that you remember hearing that had an emotional impact on you, please.
Yeah. You know, um, I think, you know, when I was about 9 or 8, my father would take me to, these CD listening bars, and that was the thing back. It's not that long ago, but CDs. And I remember always get those coupons, the weekly newsletters on like what was discounted, and I just really was intrigued by the album art of the bands. And so I actually ended up listening to OK Computer because at this point, I mean, it was 97, 98. OK Computer come at 94, so it had already been around. I didn't even know it existed. I was living in my own, little elementary school bubble, Southern California, and I heard I listened to Airbag for the first time, the first song off that record, and it just blew me away. I had at that point been writing some music, and my dad was so passionate about music that there was always stuff in the house, but it was one of those songs that it was like, oh wow, this is for me. My dad might not be into this. He ended up being into it, but it was that. And then I think when I was like 7 or 8, I think I heard "In My Place" by Coldplay as well,
Yeah.
and that was one of those ones I was like, oh shit. And that was like one of those beats, that drum beat. It's such a simple drum beat, but it's actually like the drum beat that you learn to separate rhythm, and that's the drum beat that I learned to how to play drums. When I was like 10 or so, just separating the kick from the snare. That was like,
Yeah.
but yeah, that was an emotional moment for me as well.
If you had to sort of pinpoint the emotion that you got as a young lad hearing Airbag, because that's a fucking heavy record, man.
Yeah, it's a very heavy. I think you'll probably see with the rest of this playlist. I enjoy sad songs. They make me feel really happy and really good, and it's kind of inexplicable. But that feeling at that moment, it was just kind of like this boundless possibility almost. It was like because I've been already playing a bit of music, it was just I'd never heard anything like that before.
Mm.
I'd never heard the drum sound that way. I'd never heard the guitar sound that way, and it just opened up this like whole dimension of emotion that like I had not experienced in music, and it was very cathartic. It wasn't as I didn't even know that okay, this is about Tom York. He had a car crash, and this is like this very traumatic moment for him. um, I tend to understand I know all the lyrics to all my favorite songs, but I don't even think about the lyrics. I remember them phonetically. Maybe that's because I think of my voice as an instrument too. So I can sing along to that song, but I sometimes it's maybe like, and then randomly I'll like listen to it and then actually understand what I'm saying. Like, oh, this is really heavy.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And do you know what? Like, you go back and you listen to OK Computer now, however many years, later, that record still sounds like it's been from outer space. It sounds like nothing else. And like,
It's true.
I would have been like, I think I was about 19 when that come out, and I was obsessed with guitar music at that point. And when that come out, I can vividly remember I still lived with my parents. I was sitting on my bed, and I think it was when what's the song where right at the end that the big drums go doom 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 and it builds and builds and builds and builds. Oh God, what's it called?
Da-da.
Uh,
Electioneering? Is it
Not
electioneering?
electioneering. No, it's slow. Oh balls, what's it called? Oh, it's going to drive me mad now. There's probably listeners screaming now.
Off OK Computer.
Yeah. Exit music.
Exit
Uh,
music. Okay.
um, when that came in, I remember sitting on my bed and literally speaking out loud, going, "Shit!" Like I can't believe what I'm hearing. This is like different level. Like
Yeah.
it absolutely blew my tiny mind then. And like you say, however many years later, you go back and the weight of that record is still really heavy, and it's it delivers still massively.
Truly, truly does. I still go back to that record.
You mentioned that your father was into music, and
Hmm.
tell me a little bit about home. Like where was it, and when you say sort of musical, was there instruments laying around? Was your family musical, or was it just records on? If so, what sort of records were being played?
Yeah. So, I think my dad always wanted to be a musician. I just didn't think he saw the opportunity for him. He moved from my mother and my father moved from India in 1984 to Michigan, in the States. And my grandmother, my dad's my dad's mother was a professional singer. When she was 16, she was being scouted to sing all these like Bollywood things, and but then she had the pressure of family and all that stuff, so she kind of like deferred all of her dreams. And so my dad, it was kind of a mixture. He was a tabla player, so he's a great percussionist. He has a great sense of rhythm. He has a great sense of melody. So there were drums around the house. Um, and there was a bit of Bollywood, there was a bit of all that, but he was really into Pink Floyd at the time. That obviously the British invasion had hit India and really never left
Yeah.
for like 3 decades. So it was that, it was the Beatles, obviously, and then Michael Jackson was popping off at that point too. So and Queen obviously as well, but just knowing he's like, oh, like Freddie Mercury is Indian, and I was like, oh, that blew my mind. So those were the things, like any of those big tentpole artists of the 80s, 90s and stuff that I grew up listening to. And it was just kind of like my dad would come back from work and just blast the speakers, and we'd be listening to music for like before dinner for like 2-3 hours, and he'd be like, Samir, you can dance if you want. I'd always be dancing, and stuff like that. So it's just
So cool. Um, let's stay in the formative years for track 3, and I'm going to ask you please to tell me the song that reminds you of your time at school, please.
well, if it was high school, then it would be Angelus by Elliott Smith. And Elliott Smith, I think, he would have turned, I think, 56 or 58 yesterday, the other day. And this goes back to the same thing of really sad music makes me extremely happy. And Elliott Smith is also one of those just amazing guitarists where like it's like, are you playing 3 instruments at once? Like, how are you doing this? And then I'd see videos of him because all these artists are like old artists, and they'd passed away before I think I even discovered him, or he had just passed. And I think all the emo kids in my school were all listening to Elliott Smith. And I remember I was dating this girl who had a really great taste in music, and she like got turned me on to him, and I just was obsessed. But he was playing all those things like just like this. It was absolutely insane. And so that song reminds me of just kind of like sitting with the crowd, like the kind of the emo crowd during lunch, and just kind of like sharing headphones and listening to Elliott Smith.
Wonderful. Did you enjoy school?
I did actually, surprisingly. Maybe not surprisingly. It was a good place for me. Where I lived was pretty open. There was just it was very diverse, and it was kind of like what people did. And music was a huge deal, right? So Rage Against the Machine had just come out of my hometown, and a band called Thrice as well, who maybe you have heard of, may or may not have heard of. Their
Yeah,
post-hardcore band.
yeah, absolutely.
So that was like a big thing, right? And we were like after school, there were these school programs and battle of the bands but that would all these artists from different schools would kind of compete. And I started playing shows, by the time I was 14 or 13. And so that was kind of my life. And that bled so much into my school experience as well.
Was that sort of, that desire to create music and stuff, was that encouraged at school?
Yeah, most definitely. It was most definitely encouraged. Yeah, I think the reason why where I grew up was so diverse was because the public school system was very good, and so they were kind of hippies, Southern California. There were no walls in classrooms, or they had like these like portables, and it was just everyone was like, music is very important for understanding, and we've tried to give back to the music funds of Irvine, that in California where we live, because we're products of that environment. I grew up playing violin when I was like 7 or 8, and obviously the recorder with hot cross buns, like American canon. I don't know if in England what you guys if they make you play any instruments like a recorder when you're like 7 years old, but
Always the recorder. Always the recorder. Um, was was there ever any sort of question as to what you wanted to do? Was you say you was playing already at sort of 13, 14? Was that,
Mhm.
did that seem like a viable option as a career?
Honestly, I didn't think about it too much. One in part was because, I hadn't, to be honest, never really seen anyone who was Indian who was in the type of music that I really liked. And One thing I did know was that it was something that I was really good at. It was something that was came very easily to me, very naturally to me. Whereas in a lot of things in my life that I did excel in, I I tried. I was really trying, and music was this thing that was a feeling. And so I actually I went to Stanford University for human biology and fiction writing, and that was my goal. I actually, at the point of leaving for school, I had already gotten this potential record offer with, I think, Hollywood Records. Essentially, we were this young band that was playing at Disneyland. It was a different lineup, but it was more or less kind of this group that I'm still in, and they were kind of pushing us to kind of be like the Jonas Brothers of that time. And I think that that wasn't really resonating with me. And so I decided to go to school, and I was just like, yeah, I don't, music is something I love. I don't know if it's something I want to make my job. And then it just kind of fell into my lap. Halfway through college, I decided to leave because the EP that we'd made was starting to pick up steam, and this kind of the rest just happened.
How did that feel when your EP gets picked up on, and all of a sudden things look like the wheels are starting to turn in a very very tough industry?
Yeah, no, obviously extremely validating, and everyone has these moments and connectivity to their imagination, and being able to communicate what you're feeling to people is a very important thing. I think in any way, if it's music or through any medium, it's like if people are resonating with what you're feeling, it feels so validating. And at the time, we were so young, and the scene was so cool back then. I mean, we were just at the era of Interpol and the Strokes, and like Kings of Leon was like the biggest artist in the world. They weren't just
Yeah,
the biggest rock band; they were like the biggest artist.
yeah,
And alternative rock, indie rock music was really making a cultural impact, and it just was such a great time to be a part of it. You
yeah.
know.
Absolutely, absolutely. Got a real golden era. I was really lucky. I got to speak to Daniel from Interpol on the podcast yesterday, and I was doing my best not to get overexcited and fanboy out.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you for track four, please, Samir, to tell me the first song you remember buying from a record store.
Yeah, so I think it was to be fair, it was a record, and everyone kind of no one ever says the embarrassing one, right? Like everyone says like, oh, I
I
did the,
only want the embarrassing ones, man.
well, I think it was funny because it was the same CD listening bar, and I had like it was two records that or three records that I like at that point I still was like, Dad, like, can you buy this for me? And it was like one was like Take Off Your Shirt, Pant, and Jacket, like Blink-182. The other one was like a Green Day record, and then the American Idiot or something. And then the third one was Papa Roach, the one with the freaking roach on it. And my dad allowed me to get the one with the roach on it. And so like the Papa Roach was like the first, I think the first record I technically bought. I remember just listening to that, that Cut My Life into Pieces song. Like, like this goes hard. I think that was probably, the first one.
I mean, that track is Last Resort, isn't it? Like
Yeah,
that.
Last Resort. It's a great song. It's a
Yeah,
great
that
song.
holds up, doesn't it?
It
It's
does.
it's still a banger. That.
It's timeless.
And as you sort of got a little older and be touring and stuff like that, and in different towns, and things like that, how important did record stores become for you then? Would you always, sort of, if you was out and about, duck into a record store? Tell me about your
Hmm.
relationship with the record stores.
It's interesting. Record stores for me, maybe it's because I didn't have access to it. Um, it was something that always felt expensive. I didn't really have the set spending money, or I never thought to spend my money on this thing, right? It wasn't a part of my culture, or it wasn't a part of the tradition of what even my parents were doing. But what was happening really, and this obviously dates me, but also, I'm still pretty young. I mean, it was like when I was coming up and really getting into music. I mean, it was all P2P sharing stuff, right? So it was all like Kazaa and LimeWire. And unfortunately, I mean, I obviously later on you understand the true value. And now we've so heavily devalued what people
Yeah,
do. At that point, it was starting to be devalued. So, it would, but it really was for me, it was like mining, like after school going to the blogs and then like just mining Kazaa or LimeWire or whatever the hell, and finding these ripped versions of records. And I think it was only after I'd put out my own records and went to the record store, and it was a part of a generation I think that I just missed. And then I started really getting into it in my 20s probably. And obviously like Amoeba Music in Hollywood. That was when we were making our first album. We were living in Hollywood, and I think I went there, once every other day, and just kind of like combed through things. So it holds a special place for me now, but it's something that wasn't there immediately when I was
Yeah.
coming up.
Okay. I'm going to ask you for track five, please, to tell me about the song that soundtracked your years clubbing.
I'd have to say there's like that Touch It Technologic um, song. There was like a mashup from the Daft Punk Alive album in 2007. And that reminds me so much of those years. It was like, the end of high school, into college. Coachella was still popping. It was like the thing, like all the big artists, all the cool artists playing. And I remember Daft Punk had performed, and it was just like it echoed into the internet. I mean, it was just like an absolutely insane thing. And that Alive record was just like the soundtrack to going out, I think, for me for years.
Yeah, that's a huge record as well.
Hmm.
Okay, I'm going to take you home for track six, and I'd
Hmm.
like you to tell me a favourite song from an artist from your home county, please.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because a lot of what I'm doing for this new record, American Bollywood, is kind of like trying to piece together the influence of like Indian music, classical music, Bollywood music, 40s and 50s, into psychedelia, 60s and 70s, into grunge music, 80s and 90s, or hair metal, briefly, 90s. And I've been kind of like piecing through like the things that the interconnectivity of like surf rock music and like in psychedelia. And one of the artists that I've been going back to, who I didn't really, my parents grew up listening to him a lot, is Mohammed Rafi. He was the sound of Bollywood really in the 60s and 70s. And there's a lot of surf rock influence. There's a lot of stuff that you could connect into the world of like even old Hollywood, Sinatra, and South America bossa nova music. And there's this particular song that I think it's pretty famous now. It's been synced a couple times on some Western films. It's this song called John Pechan Ho. It's by Mohammed Rafi, and it's a great song. It's just like a
Yeah,
great surf rock tune. Yeah,
yeah, it's got a real urgency to it.
it really does. Yeah.
So tell me about you mentioned there for the new record that you sort of trying to weave together these different movements in music and these genres and trying to find a sort of a line that goes through them. How do you sort of go about doing that?
Hmm. It's a mix because you don't ever want to any piece of art to feel like overwrought and overthought. And so it's a part of it is just kind of like really digging into the subconscious influences that already exist in me, the things that excited me about what I grew up listening to and how that connects to everything that I
Yeah,
still listen to. And so it was kind of just like a theme in my life that I just started to kind of pick it out. Like, oh, like, hey, Fortet just did a thing with Tom York, and Fortet is half Indian, and Tom York loves using Eastern scales. I realized, that so much of what I loved about Tom York's singing and melodies is that so much of it is Eastern scaling. That reminds me of like really just classical like Indian music. And so is taking me there, and then I was just kind of getting really interested in. I was trying to change people's notions that alternative music in America is its own bubble that exists there, and it's cut off from the rest of the world in some way. Is that this, even the Beatles and everything that went afterwards, has so much to do with where I come from, and it's just trying to find those roots for me
yeah,
to show uh, where my thought process is going. So it's kind of like something that was natural.
yeah. And was that something that you spend the time kind of sort of piecing that together? Was lockdown kind of key in having the time to sort of explore these things?
Totally. Lockdown was was so important. It's I tend to listen to a lot of my music during drives, and uh, I wasn't driving as much, but I was my wife was pregnant during that time, and so I was always running errands, or I was always like cleaning the house and just doing things, and I would always have my headphones in, and I was just kind of like going down a deep rabbit hole.
Nice. I'm gonna take you home. Sorry, I'm not gonna take you home. I'm gonna ask you to be a tastemaker for track 7.
hmm
And this is your chance to introduce someone to something new. So, Samir, can you tell me, please, a song that you think many people may not know that you would like them to hear, please?
Yes, there's an amazing artist named Spill Tab, and she has a new record out, a new song out called Splinter, and it's just beautiful, so well done. And she's a part of this. She was on this show that I have as well. It's on Sirius XM Alt Nation here in the States, and it's essentially like an artist spotlight of just great artists of color within the genre of alternative music. And so she was one of my artists, and I end up kind of interviewing them as well and listening to this. The show's called Point of Origin, so we kind of go into the point of origin that connects them to their music and connects them to their heritage. And her story is just really interesting. She grew up around recording studios her whole life, and with those kids who are second generation musicians who like are still into it, they're the best. They're like they're timeless.
Yeah,
Geniuses. Even like James Blake is just it's amazing. And so this song, you just can kind of see some of that genius, and I'm excited to see what she does with the rest of her career.
yeah. I had a listen when you sent your list over. It's a beautiful track.
Yeah.
Um, the show that you do where you interview people and that outside of the US, can people access that?
We're working on it right now. I
Yeah,
had a thing with Pandora before, and now we're just kind of figuring out a new phase of it. But it'd take its time. But there's a whole archive of podcasts. There's a year's worth of stuff that I'll have out there soon.
yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Um, well, not just the last track, but all of the tracks we make available to people via the accompanying Spotify playlist that we always do to accompany this podcast. Um, as 2022 is venturing into the second half now, and the world seems far, far removed from the lockdown we just spoke about, and it feels that gigs are happening, festivals are happening, tours are happening, people are back in studios. What can people expect from you from the rest of the year?
We'll have some limited appearances and performances in the fall. We've released the first act of our record. It's a 4-act series. The second act will be out in August, and we'll keep rolling them until about October. Yeah, and then I'll have some shows. Not too many. We're just doing like, unfortunately, it's all the states right now. But the goal is to come back again in 2023 and be touring a little bit more internationally and just do more extensive touring. So hope to see everyone very soon.
Wonderful. And if people want to keep up to speed with all of that, where's the best place to do that?
Just Spotify, Instagram, Apple Music, any of the things. And we're building our own, our new website right now. It's an interesting transition for us because we left our, major record label. Now we have our own record imprint. We have partners obviously with AWOL, but it's a new era for us. So it's exciting.
Absolutely. Samir, it's been really lovely to talk records with you. Thank you so much for your time today, mate.
Thank you, Stu. Have a good one.
I'll press.
Thanks so much, babe.